say, 75% of rest of the world thinks this and 10% of them think that. But the reality is, and I'm sure most of you know this in your own lives, we're good at listening to data, but we don't always believe it in our gut because it's not what our lives feel like. And I'm sure all of you have sat in a meeting where you have presented data and someone has said back to you, yeah, but I don't want it, or my kids don't want it, or my mother-in-law would never use it. These should all sound familiar because it's frequently how we bring the user into the conversation is through our own personal biographies. And the challenge is those biographies don't necessarily scale. And they certainly don't scale beyond our lived experiences to the other places you might need to be successful. And so part of what we've been doing at Intel over the last 15 years is marrying quantitative data with qualitative data. So the big, large data sets with the more impressionistic, affectual things, the stuff that moves you emotionally, right? The thing that kind of gives you that sense that you might be in someone else's life, if only briefly, and if only enough that you can kind of go, oh, yeah, that's so not me. And we have lots of ways of doing that, and we have done that, with varying degrees of success. You could say Intel has been quite successful in some spaces and possibly not done so well in others. I would say that continues to be not a technical problem, but a challenge of the imagination, right? But how do you think where the future is going? And so for me at Intel, I've spent 15 years there now. My job has always been to bring those stories from outside the building into the building. So from the market, basically. It helps shift product direction, technical direction, sometimes our venture capital, and these days our largest strategic direction. So how do we think about what the next 10 years of activity looks like against which we will need to make and shape investment decisions and technology directions. But doing all of that means one thing, and I thought I'd done really well at Intel because I'd said we really need to start with people. Even if we don't build directly to them, we need to have an idea about who they are. And some of the engineers I worked with over time said, okay, good, we get this whole people thing. Here are our users. And they literally showed me this picture. Here are our users. I'm like, okay, who are these people? They're like, well, they're our users. I'm like, yeah, but where'd you get them? Like, what do you mean? I'm like, have you looked at this picture? I'm like, engineering colleagues, who are good guys. I'm like, what do you mean? I'm like, you have 3 generations of white people sitting in the same room together enjoying the same content. You've either found New Zealand or Canada. Like, tiny markets and probably only during sporting events. So almost nothing else that would explain this picture, right? There's no clutter. There's only one remote control. And inexplicably, she has it. And no one seems to be cross about that. George Bush Sr. is in this print, and I don't understand what that's about at all. And there's this kind of notion of the imagination here, right, that says if these were your users, the lovely thing about them is they're already happy. All you can do in the minds of my colleagues was make them more happy. You have no legacy stuff to contend with, you have no other things, there is no pile of stuff you were managing through. These are happy people in a blank room waiting to be delighted by whatever you bring to them. And I realized I'd created a monster, right? I was like, oh good, you found users and you haven't found the right ones, you just made them up. I mean, you found basically stock photography and said, we have users. And so I said to my team at the time, okay, we've been in 100 houses in the last 5 months, go find me the absolute antithesis of this image. Absolute antithesis, then give me a good story. And my guys came back and said, oh, we got one. We had several, but it was this one. So this was taken in an apartment in Hong Kong. This is clearly an individual household, which we know is not uncommon. Much housing stock in the world is by single people. In this room, there is a television, there is a fax and photocopying machine, because why wouldn't you have that? There's an air conditioner, there's an automatic foot massage machine, there is a television, there's a VCD, a Blu-ray player, there is last week's laundry, there are 6 remote controls, I think, on the table and 2 more in a drawer. There is enough pirated content in this room that this man would never have to leave again, and all of it's connected to one set of electrical outlets. And I went, right, so here's the thing. If we want to think about people, we actually have to think about the complexities they really engage in, right? They're not living in a legacy world, they live in a world full of stuff. And oh, by the way, whilst they may have ambivalences about that stuff, mostly they love it and they don't want to give it up. Because when you give them an option to, they don't. And oh, by the way, you're going to make something compelling. You need to make it so compelling that they're willing to unplug something out of their one PowerPoint. Is it so good that you're going to unplug your automatic foot massage machine? Because that actually turns out to be a pretty high bar. You're going to put something else on that coffee table, or you're going to have to hope that something else is going off of it because it's running out of room rapidly. You want to build something, you want to make an experience, a device, a technology, an application, a service it builds into a world that's already full of stuff. It's not empty and blank and waiting to be delighted. It's full of patterns and rituals and attention that's already being grabbed by other things. So the challenge to actually being compelling for your audience, your citizens, your users, your employees, is how you manage that, right? And so we said, we want to think about users, we actually have to think about them in all their complexities and contradictions and in the places they live their lives. So much of the work we do at Intel, we actually follow people home, not in a creepy way, because I know that sounds creepy, but we actually go and hang out with people in the places they make meaning in their lives. It's one thing to administer surveys, it's one thing to bring people into labs and focus groups, and I recommend all of those. I think they're very useful tools. I also think nothing beats following someone back to the places where they make meaning in their lives, whether it's their homes, whether it's their places of business, whether it's their desk, whether it is ground control for their server farm. I can guarantee you will find things in those places that people don't remember to tell you, or that they don't regard as important, or they develop some workaround because there's something you've done that you never realized had that consequence, and they never bother telling you they have that workaround because they've just done it that way forever. And the only way you find those things out is to follow people back and be willing to ask incredibly open-ended questions. My usual question in people's homes, I don't come in with a survey set of questions. I found those to be less useful because they already prejudge the answers, right? It's one of the challenges with questionnaires. Unless you construct them well, they generate the answers for you. You've already determined what you're going to hear. My first question is usually, who lives in this house and why? And that's a particularly useful question, right? Who works in this building and why? Also not bad. Who sits at this desk? Who writes those post-it notes? And when did you last take them down? All of them are about how do you sort of help people tell a story to you about what they're actually doing. And usually in that are revealed all of these patterns we forget about, right? And all of these things where, certainly in Intel's case, I remember many years ago now, we were building the Pentium 3, Pentium 4 era, so pre-laptops, mostly still desktops. And we were having all of these problems in India with our technology. And I'd just been in India doing fieldwork, and I was showing pictures of what people were doing with desktops, basically. And desktops were at that point 2 months to 3 months' salary. They were precious objects. When people stopped using them, they wanted to keep them neat and tidy and dust and insect and frog-free. So they used to wrap them up immediately upon stopping using them. Well, we built them so that the fans would continue to cool the microprocessors for at least 15 minutes. If you wrap it up immediately, what you do is burn the whole thing out. And we had all these outages and we couldn't work out why. Because it had never occurred to us that there would be a place where there would be so much dust and ambient insects and frogs that you would want to wrap your technology up. It turned out the solution was just putting a screen on the fan. It's like, $1 solution. But we'd never worked that out unless we had actually gone, because all we had was the broken tech. And people said, yes, we just turn it off. Because they didn't know that the next piece, and then we wrap it in a sari, it might turn out to be something we need to know. So one of the challenges becomes, how do you do research that's sufficiently open-ended that you don't prejudge the answer, but that also lets you hear the things that people don't always know how to tell you. And that, I think, requires as much art as it does science. But ultimately, it's about how do you pay attention to what's really there, not just what you hope is there. And that piece for me is always an interesting balance, right? And in doing that, you find lots of interesting things. But we also know that the world moves on, right? There is a tremendous amount of new technology in the world. Sits in many of our businesses, whether it runs from, all the buzzwords of the last 5 years, the Internet of Things, analytics on the edge, the cloud, hybrid cloud, partitioned cloud, security, big data, big data, big data, small data, fast data, slow data. Particularly like that when I heard it recently, I'm like, I don't know what it means. Like slow data, I think a la slow food, but it's very unclear. Lots of stuff, right? Also, 3D, haptics, virtual reality, augmented reality, next generation security technologies, ubiquitous computing, ambient computing, pervasive computing. There's a lot of it circulating around, right? And lots of conversations that run through them. And about what it will take to deploy those technologies, make them meaningful, make them useful. And we often think that those are technical challenges, right? The reality is, from where I sit, most of those technical challenges have sitting under them what I would call some unexpected challenges. Queensland, that piece of art comes from Toowoomba. That piece of art is inexplicable to me about where the cows' heads are gone. But that's okay. Nagging questions, right? First question, we talk about privacy, but sitting underneath and on top of privacy, a whole lot of really complicated human attitudes, which appear to be in direct contradiction. On the one hand, we like to share stuff everywhere, all the time. On the other hand, we worry tremendously about what anyone is going to think about us. This would be Facebook and Snowden. So how do you navigate between those two things, right? It's not enough to just talk about privacy anymore. Privacy legislation is predicated on the idea about individual pieces of data. It's not the individual pieces of data that are a challenge for many consumers and citizens. It's about what happens when you aggregate those and start to be able to make decisions on the basis of it. We know that we've come through a cycle, I'd say maybe the last 5 to 7 years, of a great deal of sharing online by both consumers and indeed by enterprise. What's interesting, I think if you'd asked 3 years ago, we would have said, and in fact many people did, coming out of Silicon Valley, that the privacy genie was out of the bottle and we would go. What is fascinating, if you fast forward 3 years, the kids that are the younger siblings of that generation who allegedly took the privacy genie out of the bottle, the younger kids, the trailing edge of millennials, they care more about privacy than anyone in this room. And they are enacting a whole set of privacy strategies. Their use of Facebook looks completely different than their older siblings and cousins. They treat it as you need a Facebook page, doesn't mean you post anything on it. Their use of things like Vine, Snapchat, Yik Yak, the whole collection of them, I know, excellent name, demonstrates that there is an interest in sharing, but a much greater notion about how you want to regulate and control it. We're already seeing moves by various governments the world over to think about how you might regulate what's already on the internet and what might be redacted. So think about this as the right to be forgotten coming out of Europe versus, say, data retention here. Interesting kind of conflicts that you start to have. And of course, all of those have interesting challenges for how we design technical solutions. What does it mean if some data can be available in some parts of the world and not somewhere else? We're going to partition the cloud, are we going to watermark data, are we going to have deep packet inspection out the node? And how's that going to function, right, as we start to think about this complicated world? And, what does it mean when we think about other sorts of things that might get shared? It's one thing to say, I put a picture on my Facebook page. It's another thing to say my electronic thermostat shares what the house temperature is in my house. Those are two very different notions of sharing, right? And two very different things that are shared with very different possibilities of how people might assess you and what that might mean, right? I think in some ways as human beings we're used to certain sorts of consumption inside our household being quite invisible. The notion that it might be broadcast, think all Internet of Things, smart home technologies which have the ability to share information in new and unexpected ways, both with you and with others, suggests that this tension here between sharing and how we think about it only amplifies as the next generation of technology comes along. And I think it's not just at an individual level, but a household level, and my suspicion is you may see it at an enterprise level, you may see it at a city or state level. What does it mean to start to think about smart cities? Only men should be on trains because it's dangerous for women. Trains were going to be dangerous. What did it mean that you could move from Manchester to Liverpool that quickly? Was that defying the laws of nature? This would disrupt the sanctity of village life. I mean, it was a kind of a set of pushback that seems funny to us now. But think about the conversations we had about electrification, about television in particular, another one that generated a lot of anxiety. Will television be bad for us? Will it kill our culture? Will it make us fat? How far away should we sit from it? How much of it can we tolerate in a season? We're still asking those questions now of a technology that's 60 years old. But there is a set of tremendous anxieties being mobilized about the contemporary set of technologies. Whether it's about well, I'm sure many of you get this, but I certainly get asked an inordinate number of questions about when the modern apocalypse is coming. By otherwise deeply rational human beings who are convinced there will be a robot uprising and death will ensue. And I have to keep pointing out to people that the largest install base of robots on the planet currently is the Roomba. In which case the robot apocalypse is happening at this height and will involve dirt. So if you're prone to allergies, you're stuffed. If you're the rest of us, you can probably just step right over it and be fine. So much like, the Daleks of my childhood, Roombas don't have knees. They can't go up and down stairs. They're stuck on one floor. They're kind of restrictive robot apocalypse that will be containable. But the fear there, the notion that we have created a technology that will get out of control, that's a fear, particularly as Australians, we ought to recognise and respect. It's the fear of feral, right? It's the fear of a thing that has one purpose that will be uncontrollable later. And we inhabit a country that is full of things that we thought would be controlled and clearly are not. Rabbits, camels, goats, olive trees. Who knew there were feral olive trees? But I did a big problem in South Australia. There's a program. Feral olive tree eradication program. Excellent. But that suggests that these things that we think are controllable may not necessarily have the arc we want them to, right? And it is reasonable to assume that given that human beings are not always prone to be as sensible as they should about certain things, that some of these technologies may end up in complicated places. That also suggests that some of the conversations we should be having about the future of technology and about innovation aren't just technical conversations, so they're not social ones either. Well, they are social, but they're beyond that. Some of them are also philosophical questions and moral questions. As we think about all of the conversations that circle around us, around things like, I'll just pick on one, autonomous vehicles and semi-autonomous vehicles. There's a tremendous set of conversations going on about those, certainly in the United States, and I know a little bit here in Australia too. One of the conversations we aren't having about all of that is not the conversation about the replacement of human labour, but the conversation about what will happen when there is a semi-autonomous vehicle in which there are passengers and there is an accident. And people tell you that safety will be much better, but the reality is safety is only as good as your ability to predict and then manage through unexpected events. We live in a country full of kangaroos. Kangaroos are an unexpected event. I don't care how good your algorithm is, you cannot predict what a kangaroo will do when it bounces in front of you. Because that's just how it goes. So, kangaroo has now bounced in front of your semi-autonomous vehicle. Autonomous machinery comes into effect and makes a decision, and a series of split-second decisions that will have to have been programmed into the machinery and the software and the hardware already. And those decisions are going to be about, what do you save? The driver, the passengers, kids, the old people because our institutional memory is in their heads, the young people because they're the future, the reproductive age women because they're important. Do you not save any of them? Do you save the stuff outside the vehicle because the vehicle's safety system is actually back-ended by an insurance company who cares more about property than about life? And if so, what are you caring about outside? Physical buildings, stuff, other people. And all of those are going to have to be decided long before the vehicle is on the road, right? Those are things that will be hardwired into the systems. And most of those aren't really computer science questions. They're not really technical questions, right? They're questions about morality and culture and our philosophical bent about what we think we might care about and under what circumstances. And driving those conversations is actually really quite tricky, right? Because we sometimes, I think, fall into the trap of thinking that these are about technologies, not just about people. And so there is this really interesting set of problems, not even problems, right? They're opportunities. How do we think differently about privacy and security? How do we think differently about algorithms and big data? How do we think differently about localization strategies? How do we think differently about connectivity strategies? How do we think differently about storage strategies? And how do we think differently about the interface between technology and culture? Those are all huge opportunity spaces with really hard problems to go solve, and really, I think, big opportunities if you solve them right. And so for me, it really comes down to saying, listen, there's this exciting generation of new technologies coming, but every one of those technologies has to live with us and we have to live with it. And how you manage the fact that they're not just technical innovations and opportunities and problems, but always human beings in the conversation, is for me, in some ways, the big opportunity we have and always the place I'm most excited to talk about and to think about. But it also requires us remembering that it's never just about technology. That there are always going to be consumers and citizens and regulators and just bystanders who are in some ways implicated in all of this, right? And how we think about, if not including them in our decision making, certainly including them as stakeholders in the larger framework is actually really important. And for us at Intel, the way we've started to think about that is as we talk about technology solutions, we've been really clear internally that if we're going to build technical solutions, they need to be inspired by the market, so they need to be responding to things people care about or problems that people have, and that they need to be driven by the kind of experiences that we think the world will value. And absolutely, it's the case that in some of these places, that's more complicated than it has ever been. And the opportunities there to think about what does it mean to manage security and big data and the cloud and the Internet of Things isn't just a matter of how do you deploy it, but a matter of what's it going to be when we have to live with it, and how do we anticipate some of these questions before we build it and then go, oh crap, there's something we hadn't thought about. So for me, I hope those are sort of useful questions. I'm willing to kind of take a few questions from all of you if there are things you wanted to know about. Then I was going to stop. Because I thought I might breathe. But yeah.